Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I am your host, attorney Henry Gorenbein. Today on Gracefully Graying, I am very pleased to welcome as my guest a fellow videographer, videocaster, Wendy Green, as we discuss her passion and podcast series, Hey Boomer. Welcome, Wendy.
Hey, Henry, good to see you.
First of all, tell us about how you came up with the name and branding for Hey Boomer for your venture.
Sure. It actually happened because I lost my job during COVID, and I have been in corporate training most of my career, professional career, and was used to, layoffs every time there's a downturn. So I knew how difficult it could be to get another position and the pandemic. And I decided, you know what? There's going to be a lot of people in our age group that are going to be impacted and that still want to feel relevant, want to feel like what we do matters, that we still make a difference in this world and have a lot to contribute. And in response to the "Okay, Boomer" meme that had been going around, I decided I wanted to do something called Hey Boomer and motivate people to get excited about this next phase of life and to find what really is their passion and relevance.
Wendy, tell us about your background pre-COVID. And you know what's interesting, I'll digress for a minute, is the fact that I was reading Free Press, and there was an article in it today saying that those who are 55 and over who have lost their jobs or who have been on layoff are finding it much harder to get back into the workforce since the pandemic hit than before. So again, the age discrimination is in full force and effect.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, the opportunities become less as we age because, one, we have more experience, and two, the employers are thinking that, we don't have the technology or the skills that are needed today, and yet they don't recognize the wisdom and the experience that we're bringing. So I think there's a disconnect there. But my background, I started with a degree in computer science, got that as a single mom because I knew it was a field that I would be able to support my children with, and soon realized that programming, I'm just too much of a social person to sit behind a computer and program. So I moved into customer support and customer training and pre-sales, and I loved that. I loved being able to help people find how what we were providing was going to help them to find solutions. And the downturns kept happening, 2000, 2008, 1987, I think it was. So I then decided to take a program at Georgetown University in change leadership to help people as we go through these changes and migrate, and then eventually went into life coaching. So it's always been my passion to find a way to help people help themselves, to find that passion and that drive and that confidence in themselves to be able to live their best life. And so, that's really what I've been doing. And that's what I'm doing now with Hey Boomer.
How has this impacted on your decision to create Hey Boomer?
It was really, Henry, not well thought out initially. I just was in my house going, okay, I'm in quarantine. I have my cat, but I have nobody else. How am I going to reach out to people? I had some experience in front of the camera because I had been president of my Rotary Club for several years and had been spokesperson for some of the events that we'd done. And people said to me, "Oh, you're pretty good on camera." So I thought, well, why not? I'm going to do a Facebook Live. I've never done a Facebook Live, but why not? And so I wrote a little script and I called a few friends and said, would you be upcoming guests? And I think my first show, I had 4 guests, one of whom was my mother. And but since then, I've met people like you, people all over the world that all have something to contribute. They all have some way to motivate us, to give us ideas for what's next and what we can still do and contribute. Even as we may find some other limitations in our lives, we still are wise, important members of this society. And I'm excited about what we can do.
You're so right on. I mean, you know, age is a number, and as long as you can be productive, why not? What are your hopes and dreams for Hey Boomer, Wendy?
Wow, that's a really big question. And I've been thinking about that, Henry, because like I said, I just kind of started this on a whim. But I do have some hopes and dreams for Hey Boomer. I mean, I hope that through the stories that we share with the guests, that people find that spark. What is it that motivates you? You know, maybe it's gardening, maybe it's contributing in some way in a volunteer organization, maybe it's mentoring kids. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's some great adventure. But through the stories, I hope that people will find that spark. And beyond that, my dream is that Hey Boomer starts to build communities of people. And it's really boomers and beyond, where we might come together live. Oh my gosh, can you imagine live? And have a retreat where we might have some speakers and then some workshops where if your passion is X, you're meeting with other people in your community that have that similar passion, and you start to devise connections and plans and ways to bring that forth in a more powerful way, in a more supportive way. So that's kind of my dream for where it could go.
Wendy, why don't you tell us about some of your guests? I know you started with your mother, and what's interesting, I've been a videographer doing videos for many, many years. But when I launched Gracefully Graying, my second show was with my stepmother, who at 97 had gone to Antarctica, was still driving and teaching bridge at 99, and sadly passed away this past November after she had turned 100. So tell us about some of your interesting guests.
Wow, that's a great story, Henry. So one of my guests was in a similar situation. She's 89 now, and she wrote a book called How Seniors Are Saving the World. And at 87, she and a friend started interviewing people all over this country that are doing things that are important to them, whether it's around Native Americans or Alzheimer's or education or, you know, whatever it is. And they have found a way to give back. So she wrote a book about that at 87, and now she's, like I said, 89, and she's a spitfire. She is a wonderful, inspiring woman. I had another guest. He was really an interesting guy. He retired from the airline industry and had always been passionate about cycling. And so he decided to take his bike and ride across the country. This is not something that I'm going to do, but he told a great story about it, because it wasn't just seeing the beauty and what our country has to offer, but it was about the people that he met. And all along the road, how people were helpful to him, helping him find a place to stay, helping him find food and hydration and shade. So it was a great story. I've had doctors. We've talked about COVID when it first started. We've had doctors talking about healthy diets around kidney disease. We're going to be talking to another doctor about Alzheimer's. I've had authors, I've had adventurers, I'm having an empath on this next week. So it's really, like I said, I'm trying to find guests that when you listen, something about their story is going to spark you and go, that's something I want to explore more.
You know, everyone has a story. And what's interesting, you're covering a lot of the same types of guests and issues that we do here at Gracefully Graying. And, you know, the topics are endless, and there's a whole world out there for those of us who are either in the demographics of Gracefully Graying or who have aging parents. Mm-hmm. How do you find your guests? And I'm sure it gets easier and easier as with the word spread. So tell us a little bit about that, Wendy.
Yeah, Henry. I love what you guys are doing on Gracefully Graying. And I do think there's a lot of synergy in the guests that we've invited on. So like I said, I first just asked some friends, would you be guests? And then I started getting referrals. Oh, I know this person and I know that person that wrote a book. And then I will sometimes see an article either in the paper or in the AARP magazine. And I say, oh, that looks interesting. I'm going to reach out. And then I go on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has been a fabulous source for me. And I'll ask somebody to connect. 9 times out of 10, they say yes. Then I will send a message and say, would you be interested in talking? I have this show. 9 times out of 10, they say yes. And then it's, hey, do you think this is a good fit? Do we have some chemistry? Can you carry on a conversation? and then it's been amazing. And Henry, I make these goal sheets that I put up on my wall. And one of my goals was that people would be reaching out to me. And then it happened. It happened last year for the first time. And I was like, oh, yeah. So people are starting to hear about it and they're finding me and the Hey Boomer Show. So,
you know, it's building, and LinkedIn is obviously a great source. I mean, we're meeting more and more people through LinkedIn as well. Wendy, in the face of many challenges, what keeps you motivated?
Ooh, great question. I should ask you that too, Henry.
Okay, that's a fair one. Your turn. I'm asking the questions right now.
I'm first. Okay. So what keeps me motivated? You know, I don't want to give you a glib answer because I think that's too easy. I do get discouraged and I do get this sense of overwhelm. I think with age, we learn more about ourselves. And one of the things that I have learned, particularly with overwhelm, is I need to step back, which almost sounds counterintuitive, you know, like, oh, there's too much to do, so you're going to stop doing everything. But when your brain is in that, oh, there's too much to do, it's like you can't sort it out. You can't figure out the priorities. So I'll step back and maybe I'll go work in my garden, or I'll take a little walk, or, you know, read a book for a little while, just something to quiet myself, to where then I can look at everything that I'm feeling overwhelmed about and say, all right, you know, this one isn't really that urgent. I mean, it can wait until tomorrow or even the next day. And I start to be able to prioritize. As far as when I get discouraged, and I think that's a normal thing, it happens to all of us.
Sure.
I have several ways of dealing with that. I'm a journaler. I journal every morning, and that helps me. I journal with no filters, right? So I may have an anger or frustration or something, and I'll just get it all out, and then it starts to morph into, oh, here's another way to look at that. This could be a way to work through that. So I use my journaling. And I also have a group of very trusted advisors, good friends that will listen to me, let me vent when I need to vent, give me guidance, not necessarily advice in that you have to do this, but good guidance on how to think through, you know, take another approach. And they're cheerleaders. They believe in me. And I think that's so important to have some people around you like that.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. I was a family law and divorce attorney for, well, over 50 years now. And one of the things I emphasized during my career was the importance of journaling for my clients, especially if someone was going through a crisis, such a traumatic event as a divorce or a custody battle, to keep notes, to write things down, not only as a therapeutic means, but also as a way to really know what's going on and focus on what's important, especially emphasizing what will be important if we get into negotiations or trials. So what you're doing is so important and really very, very therapeutic.
What's also nice about journaling, Henry, is that once the crisis is over, you can look back on your journal and you can realize how far you've come. You know, you're like, yeah, that was tough, but I am resilient and I got through that. And here I am today.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
You recently had a virtual summit. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was an important event for us. Like I said, I'm trying to do events, but of course this was virtual. I had 3 presenters on that summit that were PBS Next Avenue, influencers in aging. We talked about several things. One, we talked about second act careers because many of us are not ready to be done with our working lives and what that can look like. We talked about solo aging. And, you know, we think about solo agers as people that may not have a partner or people that may not have children. But at the end of the day, we can all end up as solo agers. And so how to plan for that and how to think about, you know, who you need around you as your support team. We talked about that. And then we talked about what it means to thrive in this next chapter of our life. And it was an interesting discussion in that we brought out the point that thriving is not necessarily a term that people use when they talk about aging and elders. And why not? We know ways to thrive. We know ways to stay healthy. We know ways to eat right. We know ways to exercise. We know ways to stimulate our mind. So why can't we thrive also? So it was really an interesting dynamic in the entire panel discussion. And it was, everybody contributed workbooks and handouts and free links to stuff on their site. So it was a nice event. Thank you for asking.
Wendy, what were the goals?
The goals really were around thriving. It was to help people look at aging and say, how are you going to thrive in this next phase of your life? And giving them different options and ways to look at that.
Wendy, tell us something about you that we will not find if we did a Google search.
Well.
Now we're going behind the scenes of Wendy. Go ahead.
I know, I do have a good one though. When I was 16, I had visited Congress in Washington and saw all these young people running around helping, and they were pages. Never dawned on me that they were all boys. And so I wrote to my congressman and said, I want to be a page. And they said, we don't have girl pages. It's like, oh, okay. So my dad, being in PR, wrote to, had me write to Nixon, to all of our congressmen. You know, it became a big national story. I ended up being the first girl page in the country, but I was in Tallahassee where my state senator was, and got to spend the second half of my junior year of high school in Tallahassee as a page for my senator.
How'd you find that experience?
It was enlightening, you know, it really was enlightening. And in those days, I really did feel like our congressmen tried to listen to their constituents, and we managed the calls that came in and the votes that came in, and we, you know, shared a lot of insight, and he shared a lot of insight with me about why somebody might go into the role of being a senator or state senator. So it was a really interesting experience. It was also interesting being the only girl in that role, and the housing wasn't set up for me. And yeah.
I'd be interested as to how many women were state senators back at that point in Florida.
I don't think there were any.
Okay, so
at least in Florida.
So things have changed, that's for sure.
Yeah.
You recently returned from Yosemite. Before the show, you were talking about the fact that the heat was unbearable, but tell us about your trip.
Yeah, Yosemite is an amazing place. It has so many different biospheres, I guess you would call it. You know, it has the sequoia forest where you see these amazing, gigantic trees and pine cones that are much bigger than what we would normally expect to see as a pine cone. And that was fantastic. And then you have these gigantic mountains, you know, El Capitan and Half Dome that people climb. They climb these mountains, and some of them, they'll take a couple of days to climb these mountains. Yeah, it's amazing. And then they have the valley, which is a totally different atmosphere with lots more trees and water running through it, and, you know, lots of trails for people to walk. So it's a gem. It's a great, any of the national parks. And they're such a gift to us as Americans to have all these national parks.
They really are. Wendy, tell us about the value of time.
Ooh, you know, time is such an interesting thing, Henry. It can control us, right? We can think, oh, I have this to do next, and I have this to do next, but time is really a structure that we've created to measure when something starts to when the next thing starts to when the next thing starts. I don't wear a watch anymore because I don't like to be controlled by time. If I'm hungry, I'll eat. If I'm not, I won't. You know, it doesn't matter that it's lunchtime or earlier or later. But time is something that is also, you know, this is the time that we have to make a difference, to be inspirational, to be loving, to build those connections. You don't get it back, right? You don't get time back. So
it's also not infinite. I mean, our goal is our tagline for Gracefully Growing is living life fully, and that's our goal. And we could live a full life and be around until 100, like my stepmother was, or one of my former law partners, just passed away at 85. So we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. Wendy, tell us about how pain is inevitable, yet suffering is optional. Tell us what you mean by that.
Okay, sure. That is a blog post that I just did. And it's a difficult concept for people to accept. We all are going to experience pain. I had a lot of sciatica pain when we were out in Yosemite. And had I chosen to suffer through that, I probably would have missed so much of the beauty. I would have missed walking on the trails. But instead I said, okay, it's going to slow me down, no question about it. But I have my walking stick. And the beauty of slowing down, I found, was I saw more things than I would have seen had I been in this hiking mode. You know, I've got a destination, I'm going there. This way, I just took my time. And if it hurt, I slowed down even more. So I think what is important to recognize is that pain, emotional pain, physical pain, spiritual pain, is inevitable. We are human beings and we're going to feel that. How we choose to deal with that is the mindset. And that's what I mean by suffering. We can choose to become victims to that pain, or we can choose to say, okay, I feel this, and how am I going to deal with it? And is there a way to learn something from it, or to just accept it and move on?
Were you part of a group on this trip?
No, it was myself and my boyfriend.
Well, it sounds like a wonderful trip.
It was. Thank you, Henry.
Wendy, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, don't get married at 19.
It's interesting. Fewer and fewer people do. More and more people are marrying for the first time in their 30s, whereas a generation ago it was, early to mid 20s. So I think more and more people are taking that advice.
Yeah. What about you, Henry? What would you tell your younger self?
It's like, I think wisdom is for the aging. It's like we have more wisdom now, and looking back, there are things I might have done differently, but overall, I don't have a lot of regrets over my life. So
awesome.
That's what's important.
That's awesome.
Wendy, describe a triumphant moment for you.
Oh, yeah. So I said I got married at 19. I was divorced at 27 with 2 small children. They were 2 and 4, and I didn't have a college degree. So I went back to school, and that's when I got my degree in computer science. And that was a huge triumphant moment to have my children there, to have my parents there, to have the dean of the department, who was my rock through that. There were many days that I thought, there's no way I'm going to get through this program with 2 little babies, being on my own. I didn't live near family. So that was a huge triumphant moment for me when I walked across that stage to get that diploma.
Wendy, we're almost out of time, but before we sign off, would you give our viewers some takeaways about this show for us?
Yeah, about Hey Boomer and about Gracefully Graying. And I think both of us want to encourage people to live your life for as long as you can live your life. And, however that is, I mean, it may be slower, it may be more deliberate, but it doesn't have to stop until you stop. And I think also to remember that we are relevant. I think society tends to take aging as almost an illness, oh, you're losing your faculties. Oh, you're not able to do what you used to do. But we are relevant. We have lived a lot of life. We have learned a lot of lessons. We are role models in our families, and we are role models in our communities. We can work with the younger generation. So I do encourage everybody to get involved in some way and recognize your own wisdom, relevance, and strength.
And Wendy, through Hey Boomer and also through Gracefully Graying, we're sharing wisdom, we're sharing knowledge, we're sharing a wealth of information. We're out of time. Wendy Green, Hey Boomer, I want to thank you so much for being our guest on Gracefully Graying, and I want to thank our viewers for watching Gracefully Graying. Please watch this video on our Gracefully Graying YouTube channel, and also look at and like our Gracefully Graying website. Thank you again, Wendy.